You ever live across from someone so different from you that it feels like you're in two separate worlds, yet the same view binds you every single day? I work in a building that scrapes the sky. Chrome glass, sharp lines, and a rooftop garden no one uses except for drone shots on our company website. The kind of place that feels cold no matter how many fancy coffee machines they install. The man across the street? He lives in a house no bigger than a three-car garage, wedged between a boarded-up deli and an overgrown alley. His driveway is barely wide enough for his car, which, well, let's just say calling it a car is generous. It's a rusted thing from another century, the kind of vehicle that coughs more than it drives. You can spot the flaking paint from 20 floors up. Every day, our building watches him like a zoo exhibit. We work for Victor Steele, the guy who owns everything within 10 blocks, including, technically, the sidewalk in front of the mechanic's house. Victor isn't just rich. He's rich with a flair for drama. Always has a cigar in one hand and a smirk in the other. He walks through the building like he's in a movie. You either admire him or you hate yourself for admiring him. Victor hates that car. "I built a monument to capitalism," he said once, pacing in the boardroom, "and that piece of trash is the first thing my clients see?" The employees laughed, because that's what you do when Victor says something, even if it's cruel. I was in the room that day. I laughed too. But the guy across the street? Eli? He never flinched. Every Saturday morning, like clockwork, he'd be out there with a rag and a bottle of polish, not washing the whole car, just slowly, lovingly rubbing the hood like he was shining a memory. Never talked to anyone, never waved, didn't even look up when people jeered from across the road. I once saw two interns pretend to trip and accidentally splash soda near his driveway. He didn't react, just kept polishing. Victor would stare from his corner office with this look of disgust, as if the car offended his very existence. And then one day, something shifted. Victor stood at the window longer than usual, didn't speak, just sipped his coffee and stared at the house across the street. His expression wasn't just annoyed anymore, it was personal, like the car had insulted his legacy, like it dared to exist near his empire. None of us knew then what was coming, but I felt something in the air shift, something small, something quiet, like the wait before a storm. It happened on a Thursday night. The office was quiet, the kind of eerie quiet that settles in when most people have gone home, but a few hang around and pretending they're still working. Victor Steele was in rare form that evening. He'd just landed some absurd deal that added a few more zeros to his portfolio. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and leaned against the floor-to-ceiling windows like a king surveying his land. And there it was again, that damn car, rusty, slouched, pathetic, parked just across the street like it had the right to exist near his tower of ambition. Victor took a sip. "It's still there," he muttered. We all knew what he meant. We'd heard him complain 100 times before, but that night, something in his voice was different, sharper, like he wasn't joking anymore. He turned to us, 3 junior execs who had made the mistake of staying late to kiss up, and said, "You know what? I'm doing him a favor." We laughed nervously. We always laughed when Victor made those statements. But this time, his eyes didn't flicker with amusement. They narrowed. "You think I'm kidding?" he said almost casually. "It's an eyesore. We're hosting clients next week. They shouldn't have to see that relic." One of the guys, Wes, always eager to prove loyalty, chimed in, "You want us to talk to the city? Get it towed?" Victor snorted. "Number I want you to send a message, something he'll understand." There was a long pause. And then the worst thing happened. No one said no. No one even hesitated. Before midnight, the plan was in motion. They used fake names to buy accelerant, wore masks. They filmed the whole thing from a distance, whispering laughter into the phone like teenagers pulling a prank. The old car lit up like paper. Flames danced across the hood like they were celebrating. From the 20th floor, Victor watched with a drink in hand, expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Not a full smile, just that smug little twitch in the corner of his mouth that we'd all seen when he thought he'd won. The next morning, the street smelled like burnt rubber and regret. Nothing remained of the car except twisted black metal and a scorched driveway. I remember standing near the window, coffee in hand, watching Eli step outside like he did every morning, but this time he stopped, he froze, and then he dropped, not fainted, not slipped. He collapsed to his knees like his legs couldn't bear the weight of what he was seeing. He didn't scream, didn't rage. He just knelt there, silent, shoulders shaking, staring at the pile of ash that used to be his ritual, his relic, his something. Victor stood behind me, sipping his espresso. "Now he can finally get a real car," he said with a smirk. I didn't laugh. None of us did. And for the first time, I saw something I never expected from Victor Steele. Not cruelty, not arrogance, but something far, far colder. Indifference. By noon, the news vans were already pulling up. Someone in the neighborhood had posted a clip online. Just a short video, maybe 20 seconds. Eli kneeling beside the wreckage, his hands trembling as they hovered over what used to be the hood. It was the kind of footage that doesn't need a caption. You feel it instantly, but before the news, before the noise, there was just Eli. I watched him from our tower window as he sat motionless on the curb, hands blackened from the soot. For hours, he didn't move, didn't cry loud, didn't even blink, it seemed. People started showing up. A young couple from down the street brought him water. A delivery guy parked his bike and sat silently beside him. No one said much. No one needed to. The grief was loud enough. And then, sometime in the early afternoon, a local reporter crouched down beside him. I couldn't hear the question from where I stood, but I watched Eli nod. He was shaking, but he nodded. The interview was raw. When the news played it later that night, the entire city heard it. So did the internet. So did we. Eli's voice was low, like a man holding back a tidal wave just to form words. "That car, that was my dad's. It's the only thing I have left of him. He bought it used when I was 9. Taught me how to fix it, how to drive it, how to care for things that the world calls broken." He paused. We didn't have money. We didn't have much of anything, really. But that car was where we had our best moments. We'd go out on weekends just to drive nowhere. He'd sing old songs and tell me stories about my mom, about life, about mistakes. It still smells like his cologne. I used to sit in the driver's seat just to feel close to him again. He wiped his eyes, but didn't break. They didn't just burn a car. They burned a part of him. They burned the last place he ever smiled. And then he said something that stuck with me, something that changed everything. They didn't even ask why I kept it. They just saw rust and assumed it had no value. But sometimes the most broken things are the ones holding you together. I looked over at Victor during the broadcast. He didn't say a word, didn't blink, didn't finish his drink. He just stood there in the center of his office, surrounded by glass and power and wealth, and for the first time, he looked small. He looked like a man who had finally seen the fire he started. But it wasn't just ash on the street, it was truth. And truth, once it's out there, can't be unburned. It took less than 24 hours for the internet to erupt. By morning, Eli's story had been clipped, shared, reposted, and translated into 3 languages. Rust and Memory was trending globally. The comments were furious, emotional, relentless. This is what happens when the rich forget what it means to be human. A car? Number, that was a shrine. How heartless do you have to be to laugh while setting fire to someone's father's memory? People didn't just want an apology. They wanted justice, names, faces, accountability. Victor Steele's tower, the one he built as a monument to power, was suddenly drowning in press, lawsuits, and protest signs. Former employees came forward with stories of cruelty, of being humiliated, overworked, discarded. The fire had started on Eli's driveway, but it was now spreading through the empire Victor had built. And still, Eli said nothing. He didn't call for revenge. He didn't sue. He didn't yell. He grieved. That silence. It only made the world louder, so of course Victor did what men like him always do when backed into a corner. He tried to buy his way out. I was there the day it happened. A camera crew, reporters, and a gleaming silver luxury car parked in front of Eli's modest home. Victor stood beside it, flanked by PR agents and flashing lights. He had on his humbled billionaire mask, the practiced half-smile, the designer watch peeking from beneath a casual sweater. Eli stepped outside, slow, cautious. You could see the weight in his posture. The wreckage of the old car had been cleared, but the scars on the concrete were still there, like a burn on the earth itself. Victor stepped forward and extended a set of keys. "This is yours," he said, voice broadcast across dozens of microphones. A gift, a sincere apology. Cameras zoomed in, and Eli didn't move, didn't even reach for the keys. He looked Victor in the eyes, just for a second, and said quietly, "You can't buy back a soul." The street fell silent. Victor's hand faltered. He dropped the keys onto the hood of the car with a clink, then stepped back. A few hours later, the footage aired. By nightfall, the public wasn't just angry. They were done. Memes, boycotts, op-eds. Even a few high-profile investors pulled out of Victor's latest venture, but that wasn't what broke him. No, what broke him came later that night, when he returned to his mansion. I heard this from someone close, someone who'd worked for him a long time. He walked into his massive garage. Rows of luxury vehicles gleamed beneath clinical white lights. Sports cars, prototypes, a vintage Jaguar flown in from Europe, all spotless, all expensive, all soulless. He stood there for a long time, just stood, looking at them, then looked at his own reflection in the black mirror of a Rolls-Royce hood. He touched it and whispered, "None of you meant anything." That night, he didn't sleep. He didn't rage. He didn't even drink. He just sat in his office, surrounded by photos of a life he tried to build. Magazine covers, awards, a few scattered pictures of his childhood, faded ones, most missing dates. One of a boy holding a fishing rod beside a father whose face was barely visible behind a shadow and a scowl. Victor stared at that photo until the sun came up, and for the first time, maybe in years, he remembered. Not the success, not the fortune, but the hole, the one he'd been filling with noise for decades. There's something strange about stillness when you've lived your life in noise. Victor Steele's mansion sat on the edge of the hills, surrounded by steel gates, trimmed hedges, and silence so thick it echoed. After the PR stunt failed and Eli's quiet rejection made headlines, Victor didn't say much. No press conference, no counterattack. He just withdrew. I heard from his house staff that he'd been coming home earlier, that the rooms felt colder, that he'd stopped taking calls unless they were from his lawyer or his mother, and he rarely answered her anyway. But what haunted him most wasn't a lawsuit or a headline. It was the garage. Victor owned 17 cars, every one of them pristine, museum-level clean. The garage was built with imported Italian tile floors and ambient lighting that changed depending on the time of day. Each car was strategically placed like art. Ferraris, McLarens, a 1964 Aston Martin DB5, James Bond's car, the real deal, worth over $1 million. But he didn't feel anything when he looked at them, not anymore. That night, he stood at the entrance in a crumpled shirt and loose tie, remote in hand, turning on the lights one by one. The cars sparkled, reflected him back in smooth curves and glossy black surfaces. He didn't see beauty. He saw emptiness. And across town, in a house the size of one of his closets, Eli sat on his front porch, staring at a patch of pavement where his father's car used to rest. They were two men, divided by wealth, but connected now by an absence. I think that's when the memories started creeping in for Victor, the ones he buried beneath deals and digits. The photo from years ago, him and his father on a fishing trip, neither smiling. The sound of the man's voice, always sharp, always tired. The way Victor used to stare at other kids with dads who laughed. He remembered the day he left home for good, promising himself he'd never need anyone again, that he'd earned so much the world would have to love him. And maybe it did, for a while. But love built on power isn't really love. It's fear in a tuxedo. And now, stripped of control, he finally felt it. Loneliness. He walked slowly through the garage, hand brushing over the hood of a Lamborghini like it might comfort him. But it was cold, lifeless. He kept walking until he stood at the far end where the car he'd offered Eli now sat untouched. He stared at it, then turned and walked back upstairs. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his study, surrounded by framed magazine covers and first-place awards. Dozens of accolades, but not one picture of someone who truly knew him. Only numbers, only noise. He opened a drawer and pulled out the old family photo again, the same one he'd stared at before, him and his father, no smiles, a space between them that felt larger now than ever, and finally, Victor Steele cried, not loudly, not for attention, but for real. And for the first time in a long, long time, he felt. He didn't bring a camera crew this time, no publicist, no keys to a shiny new car, no velvet box with a watch inside, just a toolbox. And a cardboard box full of things that didn't look valuable to anyone but him. Victor Steele showed up on Eli's doorstep one gray morning with dust on his shoes and nervousness in his throat. No driver, no suit, just a faded jacket and a pair of old work gloves sticking out of his pocket. Eli opened the door like he wasn't surprised. Neither man said anything at first. Victor looked down at the box in his arms, cleared his throat, and said, "They didn't throw everything away. I had people collect what was left. I thought maybe we could build something from it." Eli didn't move, didn't nod, but he stepped aside, and that was enough. Inside the house, the walls were lined with old photos, mostly of Eli and a man I recognized from the news report, his father, smiling in every shot, grease on their hands, mountains in the background, a life built not on wealth, but warmth. Victor stood there awkwardly, surrounded by something he'd never really known, a home. Then he set the box down on the living room floor and opened it. Inside, twisted pieces of chrome, melted dials, the remains of a steering wheel, a rearview mirror cracked but intact. Eli stared at the pieces like they were bones from a long-lost ancestor. "I didn't know what to keep," Victor said. "I just couldn't throw it all away." Still, Eli said nothing, but his eyes stayed fixed on the fragments. Later that week, Victor returned with someone new, a quiet woman named Marin, a local artist who specialized in metal restoration. She didn't ask questions. She just studied the fragments like a detective might study a lost language. Together, the three of them worked. Every afternoon, Victor showed up. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes with more parts he'd recovered from the city scrapyard. He wasn't always helpful. He dropped a wrench on his foot more than once, but he kept showing up. There were no speeches, no public posts, just time and tools and effort. Slowly, the fragments took shape. Marin helped mount the pieces onto a steel frame, something sculptural but familiar. Eli suggested placing the cracked rearview mirror at the top, angled upward, "So he can still see the road behind him," he said quietly. Victor said nothing, just nodded. And for the first time, Eli turned to him and asked, "You ever fix anything before?" Victor thought for a moment. "Not really," he admitted. "Just bought new things when old ones stopped working." Eli smiled. Not a big smile, just a flicker, a crack in the ice. "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "Some things aren't meant to be replaced, just remembered." By the end of the month, a memorial stood in Eli's yard. Not flashy, not polished, but honest. It was built from pain, from rust, from melted metal and unspoken grief. The hood had been flattened and cleaned, then mounted on a stand. Beneath it were framed photos of Eli and his father, and on one side, etched carefully into the metal, were these words, "What's gone isn't always lost." Victor didn't invite the press this time, but they came anyway. And this time, he didn't care, because for once in his life, Victor Steele wasn't trying to fix his image. He was trying to rebuild someone else's heart. And maybe, just maybe, his own. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't even planned. The memorial stood quietly on a Saturday morning, sunlight glinting off the restored metal like it was waking up for the first time. Neighbors gathered not out of obligation, but because they'd watched it rise piece by piece, fragment by fragment. They'd seen Eli and Victor working together in silence, in shared grief. Some brought flowers, others brought nothing but presents. Victor arrived late, standing off to the side. No entourage, no cameras this time. Not officially, anyway. People still filmed, but it didn't matter. His eyes were on the memorial, not the lenses. The hood of the car had been cleaned and reshaped, mounted like a sculpture. Beneath it, framed photos. Eli as a child in the passenger seat, Eli and his father at a gas station laughing, and one of them side by side, tools in hand, pride in their posture. A single plaque had been placed at the base. "For the ones we carry even when they're gone." Eli stepped forward. He didn't wear a suit, just a worn flannel shirt and jeans, the kind his father used to wear. He looked at the memorial, then at the people, then, finally, at Victor. Someone asked the question, softly from the crowd as cameras leaned in. "Do you forgive him?" Eli looked down, thought about it. Then he said, "Forgiveness isn't something you give." The crowd fell still. It's something people grow into, and growth takes time. It takes showing up, not once, not twice, but again and again and again. He looked at Victor, not with anger, but with a kind of weathered calm. "But yes," Eli said, voice steady, "I think I'm growing." Victor didn't speak, didn't try to. He just nodded, and for a long moment neither man said anything. They stood together in front of the medal that once held a father's scent, a son's memories, and the fire that had nearly erased them both. And somehow, in the quiet, something unspoken passed between them. Not a truce, not a conclusion, but the beginning of something else. Respect.